Welcome to the party. I'm Savage.
I'm Eoin.
I'm Shane.
And this is the Adventuring Party. We're back this week to talk about a topic that has sort of swum into view for me. And it's a simple question, really. Why is that the rule? When we sit down to play games, we crack open our rule book. It could be a set of wargame rules, it could be a set of skirmish rules, or a CCG. Often as not, a tabletop RPG. The GM explains the rules to the players, how the system works if they're not familiar with it, or explains the differences in this version of the system if they've been playing with the same system for a while. And inevitably someone sort of puts their head to one side and goes, yeah, but why is it like that? And often the GM, all they have is the rulebook as written and maybe the internet to back them up. And all they can say is, well, those are the rules and this is the way I'm interpreting it. And it often seems to me that there is a gap here in terms of what is published in rule sets. And that is some of the design philosophy that surrounds rules and how they can help. If we had a little bit of an insight into why rules are the way they are, why they're written, or why game systems are structured the way they are, then we'd spend less time on rulings and hunting for explanations in our games.
Well, I'd like to probably just shut down one probably obvious but also not as interesting to talk about angle on this. It's that people don't want rule books to be 1/3 rules and 2/3 people's breathless explanation of their game design genius. Well, certainly having the perspective of the game designer to hand is going to be useful. If you don't need it, it would seem very much like dead weight and extra reading, and it is probable that you should probably have it segregated from the rules somehow. But I do definitely agree that there's sort of a reluctance overall for game designers to show their work or similarly just justify their creative decisions. And readers, we're not here to say that, to put game designers under the thumb screws and make them explain what is bounded accuracy. Why can I only play one land per turn? It's not that we're need answers as so much as that the absence of answers can create problems.
Eoin, surely you've seen under the hood of many a system.
Oh God, yes. Okay, so let's start out with this, right? Everyone's aware of Dunning-Kruger, right? The less well you understand something, usually the greater you think your mastery of it is. So someone who's desperately incompetent at something often believes they're amazing at it. Because they're so bad at it, they can't appreciate how bad at it they are.
Absolutely. As I like to sum it up, if I don't understand it, it must be simple.
Yeah, absolutely. So the problem, like CCGs and war games will have people complaining about rules a lot of the time. They will complain about interactions, but they may ask for them to be changed. But no one in that arena who's kind of credible is going to decide, you know what, in my tournament we're going to play it so you can play 2 lands a turn because I'm a better game designer than Magic the Gathering, Or they might do that once and then everyone will like, what are you doing? You're a complete lunatic. It's a deranged carpenter who decides to build his own house without any knowledge of carpentry or even the understanding of what a 90-degree angle is. Like you get this in RPGs where people decide, well, I'm going to start taking apart the whole thing and I'm going to rebuild it better because I'm great. And most of the time, with people who do that, they're a disaster anyway. And any attempt to explain things to them is going to go even worse. Because they're so bad at it, they don't understand the principles behind it. Now, complicating this is the fact that this isn't like where you've got a dentist and a toothologist, where, the dentist has to defend his work against somebody who removes his teeth himself with a door and a piece of string. Like, the dentist doesn't have to go, I see your point, and of course we should, consider holistic, original techniques. The dentist should be going, this person's a moron. I'm a dentist. I don't remove my own teeth. What's wrong with this idiot? You don't have that kind of professional RPG writer. No one's got a degree in RPG writing. They might have a qualification in game design, but that's a last 10 years thing. So you might have someone that qualified game designer. Most people aren't, and none of them are professionally qualified. Game designer is not a protected term. I'm a game designer, you know. I've at least got one published game, but like, so you don't need to be saying, hey, you know, I'm official, I know what I'm doing. Everyone is to an extent a hobbyist on this one, even the people who are nominally professionals. So it's going to vary. There's no kind of appeal to authority or kind of really possible here. All right. Apart from someone with a history of long quality going, well, I've produced a bunch of games. They're all really good. So really my opinion should have a little bit more weight than yours. Okay. So you don't have that kind of, like, even like, let's look at White Wolf, legendarily bad game design, you know, especially in the early days. It moderated itself a bit now, but in the early days, at one stage, Greg Stoltz, the RPG designer, was working for Demon the Fallen. And there was two ways you could increase the difficulty of a role. You could change, because this was a D10 dice pool system, so you could either increase the difficulty number where the number you needed to roll on D10 could increase. That was one axis of difficulty. And the second one was how many successes you needed to roll. So how many of those D10s needed to have the number on it. If it was 7 plus 3 required, so I'd need to roll at least 3 7s or higher to succeed. And he went to the lead designer and he said, which one do I use if I'm doing this in the rules? And your man said, what do you mean? He says, well, when do I increase the difficulty number and when do I increase the required number of successes? Which represents which? And the game designer said, oh, just like do whatever you think feels right. And Greg Stoltz kind of did a little bit of internal screaming and then went off and designed Rain on foot of that, his one dice roll engine where you roll D10s and getting high successes meant one thing, and getting lots of successes meant another.
So that's where ORE came from.
So, a lot of the time, RPG writers, with a couple of exceptions, aren't sure exactly why their rules are the way they are. They've kind of designed a little by feel. Alright, that's your first problem. Now, there are people who could explain why they have done things. And there's kind of two broad reasons why game designers do things. The first one is they have a consistent design principle that they're operating under. So if they go, right, we want goblins to always be a threat to you, right? Like in 5th Ed. They go, okay, the one way to do that is to bound accuracy. So that accuracy can't get too high and your AC can't get too high. So even a character with +2 to hit is, in large numbers, something of a threat to a high-level character. All right. Other rules come about because they want to rules patch something in. That, this isn't working right, so we need to put in something in the rules where this will happen. Like, for example, in WHFRP 4th edition, where critical hits deal bonus wounds. Now, a lot of the time, that's actually irrelevant. If you're on 0 wounds and you get dealt extra wounds from a critical hit, it does nothing. It's got no effect. But the reason that was put in was they wanted to have critical hits be able to occur randomly so you could knock stacks of advantage off people. So people got too good at, developed too much momentum in the fight, they became unstoppable. So a critical hit was this risk that every turn in the fight you had a chance of this big stack of advantage being knocked off you. So that's one which is kind of emerged as a result of playtesting to patch a rules problem. And those are your two big kind of pillars of design that happen. It's the stuff you start all along, and then the patches you put in along the way to try and fix problems that have cropped up in playtest.
Yeah. So I think we're largely on the same side in this one then. But it's certainly that first set of rules that I think need more clear explanation as to where they come from, why they're there, what purpose they're intended to fulfill. I think bounded actually being one of the ones that's most prominent in my own mind, because this article, we'll post it somewhere in the show notes, this article was such a clear, you didn't have to agree with it, but it clearly laid out what the reasoning was. I could go back to a player who was wondering why they couldn't get a +5 broadsword and say, well, listen, these things don't exist because this is the way the game is set up, this is what's intended. Look, the game designers said so. There's an awful lot in Dungeon Masters guides and in GM's guides about how to run the game, but very often it seems that they're lacking a sort of a guiding principle as to why you should run your game, or why your game should tilt towards this kind of experience or another. We did a Soulbound review recently, thanks to Eoin, that discussed at length the sort of game that Soulbound was. If our viewers or listeners recall, it's a game set in the Age of Sigmar WarHammer fantasy universe that is about very high octane men on a mission combat against overwhelming odds. Would that be a fair summation?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. One of the responses we got in our Discord was something along the lines of, "Oh, I'm glad to hear that there's an opportunity to play a kind of a peasant level version of this." And I couldn't help thinking, why is that even something you'd consider? Like, that is very clearly, by the way the game is designed and by the way the mechanics work, it's very clearly not the sort of game that the game designers were intending you to play with this system. And I think there's an argument for game designers being very clear about the feel that they're going for with the system and what they're intending people to do with it, and that perhaps they could do themselves a lot of favors by, instead of sort of kowtowing, that they said, no, our game is simply not suited for certain kinds of play, go find another system.
Well, that's a part of the problem there, is that everyone wants to sell as many copies of their system as possible. And there's always this sort of soft pressure, often coming internally, to make your system sound like it can do anything, when that is almost never true. Don't try running a horror game with Savage Worlds or Fate, because those are very empowering systems designed to have players flip out and do crazy action stuff. At the same time, you probably shouldn't be using the Cthulhu games to run a superheroes game.
You can't argue people out of their fetish. That's what it comes down to. People have their things, and no matter how much you explain them to some people will insist, yes, but it needs to be like this, because this is the only thing that gets me going. Right? I need to have this in my game, or it's what's the point of playing an RPG? I watched somebody argue for 2 hours at one stage about how the 2d20 initiative system was completely unworkable and overcomplicated, and it needed to go, you need to be rolling dice for it, what in the name of God are you doing? The 2d20 initiative system is a PC goes, then a bad guy goes, then a PC goes, then a bad guy goes, and you can spend a meta currency to swap that up. It was just this person, he had to roll dice to determine the order in which he rolled dice to see if he got to roll dice. And that was the only way it worked for him. Like, you can't argue someone out of their fetish. It's unfortunate but true.
Right. You are not obliged to put on the suit and cater to it, though.
No, you're not. But you can't argue them out of it. There's no talking to people about these things. It's like, no, that can't be what you want. This is all I want. I was like, this is ridiculous. This is insane. This can't be your breaking point of the thing. I watched it happen in Pathfinder 2 playtest, which had a number of people flame out, but the most dramatic flame out was the person said they couldn't be involved in this, and it was a perversion of everything that fantasy gaming stood for. Do you know what that point was? Do you know what the bit was? It was that they created the champion class, which was the old paladin, and if you were a lawful good champion, you were a paladin. If you were a chaotic good, you were a liberator, and if you're a neutral good, you're a redeemer. And the person said, I'm out. I can't stand to have the paladin's uniqueness diminished.
Single issue paladin voter strikes
again.
Yeah,
single issue paladin voter. And I was like, oh dear God. But you can't argue someone out of their fetish. They're gonna want, they're gonna want their thing.
If this show has an obvious straw man, it's the single issue paladin.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we're not. We've decided early on we're not catering to him, and
no.
We never bow to the pressure.
Yeah, it might not immediately seem apparent how explaining one's design philosophy is going to have an amazing effect and solve all the problems and convert all the single issue paladin voters. But I do think the lack of thought about one's philosophy sort of feeds into the idea of blanket acceptance. It's like, because there's no reason given in the book why something is a certain way, people will just sort of assume it is the way and just bring it to the forefront. Do you want to have a side rant about why Paladin players are the way they are? Because that, maybe not.
Maybe not. And let's be clear. It's not Paladin players per se. It's the ones who see nothing else in front of them. But if it happens to a Paladin, it has to be altogether good. Otherwise, it's altogether bad. Don't keep your design goals off my Paladin.
Yeah.
And most Paladin players I encounter just want to play someone with a big sword and shiny armor that's got a reason to hit things, and that's fine.
Yeah,
it's the guys that sort of get militant about it. So I take your point, Shane, that maybe there isn't. I mean, game books have to be a certain length, and there's a page count, and there isn't space for everything. So is it really necessary that this sort of explanation about design philosophy find its way into the body of the work? I'd argue that maybe it shouldn't be the entirety of or a third of the book. Why is every rule this way? But what I would say is that some sort of preface of the philosophy around setting and tone and how the mechanics work would be pages well spent at the start of a book, because you'll often get pages about who are you running your game for, how to run your game, what is an RPG. I'd happily ditch all of those pages if instead it said, this is the system, and we want the system to feel this way, and that's why we've done certain things. You might discover over the course of playing the game that we've no mechanics to do with cover, for example. That's deliberate. That's that we don't want people hunkering down, taking cover. The game is explicitly meant to be about getting to the middle of the arena and swinging your sword at each other. Regardless of whether that's a good idea or not, it's at least an explicitly stated design philosophy and a sort of a tone that they want. Blood flying, limbs lopped, not people hiding and looking for the moment to strike. So it doesn't have to be every rule explained, but certainly, if there's something to hang the design philosophy on, that you can look at a rule and go, does this cleave to the design philosophy that I know the designers have explicitly stated? If it does, then yeah, it's very clearly meant to be in the game. If it doesn't, maybe I can determine what the explanation for that is, but it's more like as not that it will cleave to the design philosophy rather than abandon it entirely.
Do we want to talk about the validity of mutating your game? Is that... We've sort of covered this in the Fix Your Fix episode, I suppose.
Changing any fundamental rules in your game requires a good amount of mechanical ability, unless you're going to dismantle things by accident. If you understand the core assumptions under which the RPG is built, you will be better positioned to make those changes. If I go in and I go, okay, I don't know, I'm going to get rid of bended accuracy. I'm going to let everyone have as much attack as they want. I'm not going to increase their AC because their AC didn't increase in 3.5. And very quickly you'll find, oh my god, everything's dying a lot faster because the mischance has completely gone away and everyone's hit really easily. And I initially thought this would really help fighters, but it turns out it's actually really helping the classes who don't have as good proficiency bonus to attack, and now they're hitting a lot harder. So I guess, and then you end up making these really weird changes. Whereas if you looked at 5th Ed and you decided, okay, I'm going to put skill challenges in, and I'm going to model off, that might work fine. That you mightn't have a problem with putting those in because you're not attempting to countermand or change core assumptions in the game or things around which the game kind of twists or pivots. You might decide, right, I'm going to change it so that all casters are Vancian casters now, properly Vancian casters, not the 5th Ed version of Vancian casting. And you might find that the game works fine. The wizards are a little less powerful, sorcerers are a little less powerful,
So maybe what we're saying is that having your own design philosophy will empower you to to alter the design philosophy in the game.
Understanding the game's design philosophy will help you alter the game. But you need to understand it. And if you don't actually understand it, well, it tends to go less well. Just because you're like, okay, I don't fully understand why this was done. But, sure, how bad can it get?
I have to say I agree pretty much entirely there. Because my position isn't that game rules shouldn't be changed by players and GMs. or anyone who's playing any sort of game, it should be that you have a much sounder understanding of what the consequences of changing the rules are going to be, because it's been you're at least given some indication of what the intention of the rules holistically are, because all the rules have to fit together. Rules about how you hit combat are going to feed into rules about how damage is done, about how healing works, about how you gain resources or lose resources, things like that. And often the most obviously bad example of a fix is something that fixes this one, or appears to fix this one thing, without, as Owen's pointed out, taking any sort of interest in what the knock-on effects are.
Well, maybe to move away from restating a previous episode, well, one of the things I think is that maybe just aside from whether to change rules or not, I think maybe understanding the philosophy can help you understand how to play the game as is. Like, we had the great example from fellow party member Ice Cream, and how he had a horrible time running a Fate game because he didn't understand the philosophy of Fate, the philosophy of player empowerment and the like, and as a result, he had very negative experience of playing with Fate because he didn't understand the philosophy under which the game was intended to be run. And I have to wonder if the people who are writing up, trying to think of a good example, but you understand, so the people who are trying to run games that aren't suited to their rule set, that they're assuming that this rule set, because they have no idea of its philosophy, they're just sort of assuming a philosophy. It reads like this to me, so therefore we should run it that way.
You need to have a little bit of interrogation about, or discussion about what style of game is going to be. And hopefully the designer will have explained that somewhere that's not in the book. Because you don't really want to buy a game and then discover this isn't what I wanted at all. What is this? This
true,
is,
True.
So you want at least a couple, there's no standard source for RPG reviews. There's no one person that reviews everything and tells you and rates it on an objective scale, or even tells you what the themes of it are. Like, you're going off and you're finding, because it's a tiny industry, you're finding little hobbyists, and everyone's got their own thing. And if you ask someone which is the best edition of a game, you'll get 10 different answers, and that is the way of things. No, you have to make this house rule, you have to make that house rule. God almighty, don't listen to most people who suggest house rules willy-nilly. Play it a bit first, figure out what your problem is, then go back and ask questions about, okay, I'm not liking this, what have people done? You've got to engage with it a little bit. There's no one fix before you start. There are sometimes you'll find a very helpful, intelligent person who will tell you things to watch out for before they start. But that person is biasing you because that has been their problems. But that can be very helpful. But it is, you got to take it with a grain of salt, because this person may not actually have a bull's notion what they're talking about, or may only have experienced this problem once. And made a big deal out of it.
I suppose we have the advantage, as you say, it's not everything has to be in the rule book, including explanations of the rules as written. But we do have the advantage currently that we have so many different ways to reach the creators of rules now. I'm reminded of a fairly recent example, Joseph A. McCullough, who wrote Rangers of Shadowdeep. He had the game had been out a while, people were playing it, and it had reached that point in its kind of popularity curve where people were starting to say, well, maybe we should have a rule for this and that, and not really modifying the rules as they are. It's a very simple skirmish game, based on the Frostgrave system. But he was starting to see people specifically talking about, well, why isn't there, maybe we should have some rules for reach on weapons. My guy's got a pike and he's got the other guy's got a sword. Shouldn't I have a mechanical advantage with the pike? Because the game focuses quite closely on when characters are in base-to-base contact and not. It has a huge impact on the rules. And he explained that he had the opportunity at that point to point out that, yeah, absolutely, you could go ahead and put in reach rules if you like. I've tried them already, and I took them out again because they didn't help. They didn't fit the sort of game I was trying to write and trying to get on the table. And of course, there's no explanation in the game rules as to why weapons don't have reach, but it is instructive to be able to find him on the record going, there's no reach because it's actually kind of breaks a whole bunch of things in the game and slows it down incredibly.
Yeah.
And that might not wouldn't be apparent from playing the game without reach, but if you were to stick it in, it becomes fairly obvious fairly quick.
It is one of those things where, why did the designer miss this obvious thing? The designer often didn't miss that obvious thing. The designer tried that obvious thing and it didn't work at all. There's, the thing that board games have that RPGs don't is Board Game Geek. There's RPG Geek, but it's not nearly as prolific. And one of the edges on Board Game Geek is a lot of the time the designers hang out on their game pages or their designer pages, and they write design diaries explaining their decisions. So if you want to understand why certain things are done, that's a great place to go have a look and get some insight. And that really doesn't exist for RPGs in the same way. There are some people who design diaries, but not very many. It also can give you startling insights into how someone doesn't understand problems. I remember in Robinson Crusoe, the board game by Ignacia Trzewiak, I've mutilated that name horribly, sorry. He was doing a design diary he was designing this game, and Vlada Shavatil of Codenames and a million other games fame was helping him out. And Vlada said, "Why is the event deck partly good and partly bad?" And Ignacia said, because you can have good things or bad things happen. And he said, if you have a deck that's random, where it's good or bad things happen, and you shuffle that deck together and 3/4 of the events are bad, you probably lose if the game is tightly balanced. And if you shuffle that deck together and you get ones that are 3/4 good, you probably win. And the only reason you won or lost was the event deck, you're no longer in control of your game. So you need to remove this. And Ignacia said, I saw what he was saying, and then immediately ignored him and decided to do my own thing. And I was like, well, you're a fool. He just gave you game design gold. He zeroed in on the major problem of randomness in your game, identified for you, and showed you how to remove it.
The guy who knows a thing or two.
And I was like, oh my god, And I never looked at Robinson Crusoe the same way after that because of that revelation. But the thing is, you're talking about putting in the book, Mick. There is value in that. However, the problem is, RPG gamers are ludicrous tight-fists, and they will complain about certain content being in books if they don't use it immediately and all the time. For example, everybody complains about adventures being included in RPG books, and they've mostly left them because they're like, hey, it can just be a PDF instead. Except that a couple of games have come out and they have had no PDF adventure for 2 or 3 weeks. So you actually can't play it, or you don't have any idea how it is meant to play. You can just homebrew something up, and you can. But an adventure is an incredibly valuable tool in teaching players how the game is played, what are the plot beats, how much opposition should there be, how much reward should you give for stuff, how should you direct things, what should the setting feel like. And if that's missing, it's harder for people to start playing. So I think you could include game design philosophy stuff, but you're chewing into page count, and people will start complaining about you for chewing into page count for stuff they don't care about.
They'll suck up the 100th compendium of spells or weapons or magic items.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But they're not. People are rational. The market being rational doesn't happen.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Shane.
I was just going to say that the point has been made that in our modern times, we have a lot easier time reaching out to the designers of our games and asking them, why do you do this? Why do you do that? And I'm just reminded of the cottage industry of OSR blogs dedicated to explaining every single detail of the masterwork design of Gary Gygax and Brian Menser, and poring over early 2000s ramblings of a 30 years later Gygax justifying all of his questionable decisions and refusing to admit that most of it he just winged.
Absolutely.
I thought you'd made your peace with the OSR movement, Shane. We're not going to start that old brush fire again, are we?
It just seemed like a relevant example to use.
It's weird because there's actually I've seen some very highly mocked rules that when you actually think about them, when you actually experience them and play, they explain a lot and they actually work really well. Like, for example, in early D&D, where 1 gold piece was 1 experience point, everyone used to mock that. Oh, you just kill beggars and you get money, and you just stab people and get more XP. You kill a king and you get infinite money, infinite XP. And everyone laughs about it and, goes, oh, this is stupid. And then one of the people who played with Gary Gygax came into the thread and said, actually, no. The reason for that was you spent XP to train, or you spent gold to train, and that's how you went up in XP. And they said, yeah, that's so stupid. He says, no, it's not. Because if your character died, there wasn't raised dead. So if your character died and you were all 8th level, this new 1st level character came in. What you could do was you could take a point, if the old character had any money left, you could give him that money and he would level up that much. Or everyone could contribute a little bit of gold to him and level him up a bit more, so you get him closer to everybody else's level so he could contribute faster. It was actually a catch-up mechanic. But no one thinks about that. Or everyone just laughs at the thing. They don't actually think about why that rule was the way it was. That rule was the way it was so that you could basically take a level 1 character and catch them up.
I guess that's sort of getting into the back into the argument of how the design works in the game versus how people want to play. You're going to have your people who want to just ignore treasure and kill monsters for XP, or you're going to have the people who collect like 5 helmets from the bosses they kill, glue them together and ask for a bonus to AC, because in their mind, the fact that I have 15 horn helmets welded to my back somehow makes me more defensive. And is a question of how worth is it having the philosophy behind something in order to beat back that weird argument that might break your game, versus maybe the philosophy that the designer has isn't suitable for the game that your players want to have.
Well, to answer that question, I'll sort of swing back to where we were at the start and say that there's something of a positive feedback loop to be achieved here. If you have a word, a preface, a design philosophy essay, some explanation from a game designer somewhere in the body of the work, it doesn't have to be huge, but it gives that GM license to point to the rulebook and say, look, it's in the rulebook. You seem to be happy enough with the way combat works. You seem to be happy enough with the way leveling works. But if you have a problem with how this works, then I'm going to fall back to the design philosophy as expressed by the designer.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
That then builds the authority that is so lacking in the lack of credentials that are afforded to game designers, because as Eoin rightly pointed out at the start, it's not something you're going to find a lot of qualifications in. Anybody can call themselves a game designer with a very little effort, but the ones who are then sort of authoritative about their own games, other people are going to start to look at those examples and emulate.
Yeah, we're also assuming you have one game designer. A lot of RPGs are sometimes slightly unhappy marriages between 2 or 3 game designers, each putting stuff into play, and that's usually where games completely fall apart. Have these contradictory rules, like, why is this rule in here? It seems to just fight against this other rule, and it's probably because it was actually fighting against that other rule, where someone was like, I have to have this in the game, and the other person's like, it's terrible. Okay, you have to have it, but I'm going to put another rule in to counterbalance this one a little bit. And there's ones like that where you've 2 game designers, and you should never have 2 game designers on one level. You should have a game designer and a game developer, where the designer comes up with ideas and the developer okays them and puts them into the rules. And if you have that, you're generally in a better position. But like, very few RPGs have the resources to have both a developer and a designer. Basically telling someone like one stage I made up a bunch of house rules for my WHFRP game. After long consideration, like a year of play, I went, okay, this isn't working, this isn't working, this isn't working, I need to do something. Here are my potential solutions. And I tossed them out there, and I let 2 of the players veto the ones almost entirely that needed to change. Because I said, I've designed these, I can't be sure, because they're my own ideas, if they're absolutely good or not. So let's take ego out of the equation, and I will fold on every request for a change. Because then, like, you can't say, oh, you were being precious about this. No, I wasn't. I folded on every request for a change, and I think it ended up better because of that collaborative process where I'd come up with the ideas and other people shape them and tweak them a bit to make them a bit better.
Yeah, that's another thing that if we were more open about our design philosophies, that means that we can point out places where the design philosophy has failed, where a rule is in there because that's how we've always done it, but doesn't actually fit the design philosophy. Or we can point out places where the design philosophy is inherently flawed, and if we look at the game at a different angle, we can run it under a different paradigm and make a wonderful product. Because at the end of the day, people don't run Gary Gygax's D&D or Ken Height's Esoterrorists. They run their game, and having this sort of philosophy on demand is just meant to empower them to run the game that's better for them. It's not meant to be a authoritative statement of, this is the true way. It's meant to be a way to understand your game better.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're pretty much out of time on this one. It's a fascinating topic. I think there are certainly lots of examples of games or rule books that do a pretty good job of imparting the design philosophy behind them, but we've focused more on the failings rather than the achievements. That's not to say that there aren't plenty of good game designers out there who are taking the time to explain why they're doing what they're doing, and for that I think we can be grateful. Hopefully we'll see more of it in the future, but obviously it is always going to be under pressure from all the other things that need to fit between the covers. With that said, thanks for joining us this week, folks. If you've got any questions or comments about the topic we covered this episode, if you think the author should be dead and silent, or if you'd prefer a little more from the brain of Gary Gygax, in the pages of the manual, then let us know online. You can find us on Discord. We are. You can come and shout us on SpeakPipe. You can come and comment us in the usual places, YouTube and Facebook, etc. Also follow us on Twitter, because we're there sometimes. But for the most part, I think it's time to say that this party's over.
Thanks for listening to The Adventuring Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there or talk to our Twitter account at adventuringpty, or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventuringparty. The host can be contacted directly by mail at Eoin, Savage or scar@theadventuringparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, linked in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike version 3 license.